Every financial decision you made today, what you bought, what you hesitated on, what you told yourself you could not afford, what you quietly felt guilty about, was not fully yours. It was shaped by a version of your brain that has been silently altered by something you experience every single day but have never examined as a psychological force. The cost of living is not just an economic pressure. It is a neurological event, a sustained environmental stimulus that is physically changing how your brain evaluates money, calculates risk, processes reward, and constructs your entire financial identity. And the 5 specific ways it is doing this right now inside your mind are so invisible that most working adults will spend their entire lives under their influence without ever realizing they exist. This is financial education at a depth that the most elite psychology programs do not teach to ordinary working people. Subscribe to this channel right now. That is your only payment for the richest free content on the psychology of money you will find anywhere on the internet. Let us begin. I know someone, I will call him a friend because that is what he became after years of the same conversation, who sat down one evening and tried to understand why his financial life felt like it was shrinking. He was not earning less. His income had actually increased over the past 3 years. He had been promoted. His hourly rate had gone up. On paper, he was doing better than he had ever done. But something had shifted inside him that he could not name. His relationship with money had changed. Not dramatically, not through any single event, but gradually, like a tide pulling the sand beneath his feet, so slowly he only noticed when he looked down and realized he was standing somewhere completely different from where he started. He used to check his investment portfolio on Sunday mornings with a feeling that resembled quiet optimism, a sense that he was building something that each month brought him closer to a version of financial independence he could almost visualize. He used to transfer money into his savings with a small but genuine feeling of progress. He used to open his banking app and feel, if not wealthy, then at least directionally correct, moving toward long-term security, toward building real wealth, toward the kind of financial freedom that most people talk about but never structurally pursue. But now, something had changed. The same banking app produced a different emotional response. Checking his balance triggered a low-grade tension he could not explain. The investment transfers had become smaller, then irregular, then almost non-existent, not because he had decided to stop, but because the decision had somehow been made for him by a feeling he could not override. He was spending more, but not on luxuries, not on anything he could point to and call unnecessary. His Uber Eats orders had increased, not extravagantly, but from once a week to 3 or 4 times, always on evenings when the mental energy required to cook felt like a resource he simply did not have. His Spotify premium subscription had been joined by Audible, then by an upgraded cloud storage plan, then by a streaming service he barely used, but somehow could not bring himself to cancel because the act of cancelling felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that things were tighter than he wanted to believe. He had switched from brewing coffee at home to stopping at Starbucks most mornings, not because he preferred their coffee, but because the ritual of buying it provided a small neurological reward that his brain had begun to depend on, a tiny pulse of normalcy in a financial landscape that felt increasingly compressed. Each purchase made sense individually. None of them were irresponsible, but collectively, they were the symptoms of something deeper, a fundamental rewiring of how his brain was processing money under sustained economic pressure. And what he did not know, what almost no one understands, is that the cost of living had not just affected his budget, it had affected his brain. Here is precisely how, and here is why, it matters more than any spreadsheet or budgeting app ever will. The first way the cost of living rewires your brain is through what psychology calls stress normalization. And this is perhaps the most dangerous because it is the most invisible. When financial pressure is temporary, your brain treats it as an emergency. Your stress response activates, your attention sharpens, and your decision-making centers mobilize resources to solve the problem. This is adaptive. This is your brain working correctly. But when financial pressure becomes chronic, when the cost of groceries, rent, fuel, insurance, and utilities rises not once but continuously, month after month, year after year, your brain does something that feels like adaptation, but is actually surrender. It stops treating the pressure as abnormal. Your nervous system recalibrates and what was once a stress signal becomes your baseline. The anxiety you feel when you check your bank balance is no longer registered as a warning, like it is registered as normal. The tightness in your chest when you pay for fuel is no longer flagged as a problem to solve. It becomes the background hum of your financial existence. And here is the critical insight that most people miss. When your brain normalizes financial stress, it simultaneously disables your motivation to change your financial situation. Because motivation requires a gap between where you are and where you believe you should be. When stress becomes normal, that gap closes. Your brain stops perceiving your current financial state as something that needs to be fixed and instead accepts it as something to be endured. This is why millions of intelligent, capable people earning reasonable incomes do not pursue wealth building, do not research investment strategies, do not set up automatic transfers into growth-focused accounts. Not because they lack discipline or financial intelligence, but because their brains have been reprogrammed to treat their compressed financial state as permanent and unchangeable. The cost of living did not reduce their income. It reduced their neurological capacity to imagine a different financial reality. The second way is through what behavioural economics calls the scarcity tax on cognitive bandwidth. And understanding this will change how you see every financial decision you make. When the cost of living consumes a larger percentage of your income, your brain enters a state of perpetual resource monitoring. It begins tracking money with the same vigilance a dehydrated person tracks water. This sounds productive, but it is not. Research in cognitive psychology has demonstrated that when the brain is locked in scarcity monitoring, it borrows cognitive resources from other functions, specifically from the functions responsible for long-term planning, impulse regulation, and strategic financial decision-making. In practical terms, this means the person who spends their morning calculating whether they can afford their weekly groceries is using the exact same mental resources they would need to evaluate a long-term investment opportunity, review their superannuation allocation, or research the difference between an index fund and an actively managed portfolio. The scarcity does not just take your money, it takes your mental capacity to manage your money intelligently. And this creates a devastating cycle. The more financial pressure you experience, the less cognitive bandwidth you have for financial planning, which means your financial decisions become more reactive and less strategic, which creates more pressure, which further reduces your bandwidth. If you are watching this and recognizing this pattern, if you have ever felt too mentally exhausted to think about your retirement strategy or your investment portfolio after a day of managing tight finances, leave a comment telling me what the cost of living has taken from you that is not financial. Because the answer will reveal something about your brain that no budgeting app will ever show you. The third way is perhaps the most structurally damaging to your long-term wealth, and it operates through a mechanism that psychology calls present bias amplification. Under normal conditions, your brain maintains a balance between present rewards and future rewards. This balance is what allows you to delay gratification, to choose investing over spending, to choose building wealth over immediate consumption. But sustained cost of living pressure systematically destroys this balance by making the present feel urgent and the future feel irrelevant. When your brain is constantly processing the question of whether you can afford today, it progressively deprioritizes the question of whether you're building for tomorrow. The neural pathways responsible for long-term financial planning literally weaken from disuse, while the pathways responsible for immediate financial survival strengthen through constant activation. This is why someone under cost of living pressure can understand intellectually that they should be investing, that compound returns over 20 years will transform their financial position, that their superannuation contributions need attention and still find themselves unable to act on any of it. The knowledge enters their conscious mind, but their brain's operating system has been reconfigured by months or years of survival mode processing, and that operating system now treats the future as a luxury it cannot afford to consider. When you open your phone and tap Apple Pay or Google Pay for a purchase that provides immediate relief, a meal delivery, a streaming subscription, a small comfort, your brain is not being weak. It is executing the program that cost of living pressure installed. It is choosing the reward it can verify now over the reward it has been trained to doubt. Every tap on Samsung Pay, every Afterpay purchase split into installments that feel manageable, every Visa or MasterCard transaction for something that makes today more bearable. These are not failures of discipline. They are the predictable outputs of a brain that has been neurologically trained to prioritize the present because the environment made the future feel unreachable. The fourth way, the cost of living rewires. Your brain operates through a process that neuroscience calls hedonic recalibration. And this one is particularly cruel because it disguises itself as maturity. When the cost of living rises steadily, your brain does not simply adjust your spending. It adjusts your expectations. It redefines what feels like enough. The financial goals that once felt natural and achievable, building an emergency fund of 6 months of expenses, reaching a net worth milestone, achieving a savings rate that creates genuine financial security, gradually begin to feel unrealistic. Not because they are unrealistic, but because your brain has recalibrated its entire reward system to match your compressed financial reality. What used to feel like falling behind now feels like keeping up. What used to feel like the minimum now feels like an achievement. Your brain protects you from the pain of unmet expectations by quietly lowering the expectations themselves. And you experience this not as a loss, but as a kind of peaceful acceptance that feels mature and realistic, but is actually your nervous system abandoning financial ambitions it no longer believes are safe to hold. This is why personal finance content that tells you to save 20% of your income or build a diversified investment portfolio can feel so disconnected from your reality. not because the advice is wrong, but because your brain has been recalibrated to a reality where those targets register as belonging to someone else's life, someone in a different financial universe. The cost of living did not change your circumstances as much as it changed your financial identity. And identity determines behaviour far more powerfully than any strategy or financial plan. The fifth way, and this is the one that connects everything, is what I call financial identity erosion. When cost of living pressure is sustained over years, it does not just affect what you do with money. It affects who you believe you are in relation to money. The brain constructs identity through repeated experience. If your repeated experience with money is one of compression, limitation, and anxiety, if every interaction with your finances reinforces the feeling that money is something that arrives and immediately needs to be allocated to obligations, then over time, your brain constructs a financial identity that matches that experience. You become, in your own neurological self-model, a person who manages money rather than builds wealth, a person who survives financially rather than thrives, a person for whom financial independence exists as a concept but not as a personal trajectory. And once that identity solidifies, it becomes self-reinforcing. Because when you encounter an opportunity to invest, to build, to make a strategic financial decision that could change your long-term position, your brain compares that opportunity against your financial identity and generates resistance. Not logical resistance, identity resistance. The same kind of discomfort you would feel if someone asked you to behave in a way that contradicted who you fundamentally believe you are. This is why two people with identical incomes, identical expenses, and identical financial knowledge can have completely different financial outcomes. One person's identity says, "I am someone who builds wealth over the long term." The other person's identity, shaped by years of cost of living pressure, says, "I'm someone who gets by." The income is the same. The identity is different. And identity always wins. Now that you understand the mechanism, now that you can see the 5 invisible ways the cost of living has been rewiring your financial operating system, the practical question becomes unavoidable. How do you reverse a rewiring that happened without your conscious participation? The first strategy targets stress normalization directly. You need to create what I call a financial contrast ritual, a deliberate, scheduled practice of exposing your brain to evidence that your current financial state is not permanent and not normal. This means spending 15 minutes every week. Not every day. The frequency matters, reviewing content about wealth building, about long-term investment strategy, about financial independence and retirement planning. Not as entertainment, as identity programming. When you watch content about someone who built a portfolio through consistent monthly investment over a decade, your brain is not just receiving information. It is building neural pathways that connect you to a financial identity your current environment is trying to erase. When you read about compound returns, about passive income, about the mathematics of financial freedom, your brain is being shown a reality that cost of living pressure has trained it to forget exists. This is applied neuroscience. Your brain builds pathways through repeated exposure, and you can choose what to expose it to. The second strategy targets the scarcity tax on cognitive bandwidth. The solution is not to think harder about money. It is to think less often by automating every financial decision that the cost of living has forced into your active attention. Set up automatic transfers to your investment account, even if the amount is modest, especially if the amount is modest. The goal is not the dollar amount. The goal is removing the decision from your depleted cognitive bandwidth and placing it in an automated system that executes without requiring the mental energy your brain no longer has available. Every financial decision you automate frees cognitive resources for the strategic thinking that cost of living pressure has been stealing from you. Cancel subscriptions you do not actively use, not to save the money, although that matters, but to reduce the number of recurring financial micro-decisions your brain is tracking. Every Netflix subscription, every Amazon Prime renewal, every YouTube premium charge that auto-renews is a small cognitive claim on your bandwidth that aggregated consumes resources your brain needs for higher-order financial planning. Simplify to liberate mental capacity, not just cash flow. The third strategy confronts prescient bias amplification by making your future financial self visible to your present brain. The reason your brain deprioritizes the future is that it cannot see it, cannot feel it, cannot verify it. The counter strategy is to create tangible evidence of your future wealth that your brain can process as real. Open your investment account weekly, not to manage it, but to show your brain the trajectory. Watch the number. Let your brain register growth, even if small. Check your superannuation balance monthly with the deliberate intention of letting your nervous system absorb the fact that this is yours, this is growing, this is real. Track your net worth in a simple document and review it regularly. You're not doing accounting. You're retraining your brain to perceive the future as something that exists, something that belongs to you, something that is worth protecting. Every time your brain sees evidence of long-term financial building, the neural pathways for future-oriented thinking strengthen, and the dominance of present bias weakens. not instantly, but with the same gradual power that installed it. The fourth strategy directly addresses hedonic recalibration by deliberately resetting your financial expectations upward. This means consciously re-exposing yourself to financial benchmarks that your brain has quietly abandoned. Look at what a well-managed portfolio returns over 10 years. Calculate what consistent monthly investment, even small amounts, produces with compound growth over 2 decades. Review what people in your income bracket have built when they maintained financial strategy through difficult periods rather than abandoning it. Your brain lowered your expectations to protect you from disappointment. Your job is to raise them again, and not through wishful thinking, but through mathematical reality that your brain cannot dismiss once it processes the numbers. The fifth strategy targets financial identity erosion. And it is the most powerful because identity is the deepest layer. You need to begin acting as the financial identity you want to inhabit, even while the evidence of your current compressed reality still surrounds you. This means describing yourself differently, internally and, when appropriate, externally. Not as someone who is struggling with money, but as someone who is building wealth under difficult conditions. Not as someone who cannot save, but as someone who is developing a financial strategy. The language you use about yourself becomes the instruction manual your brain follows. Change the language, and the brain begins to update the identity, slowly at first, then with increasing momentum as new evidence accumulates. What you have just learned is one essential layer of something much larger operating beneath every financial life. The cost of living does not just affect your bank account, it affects the neurological infrastructure that determines every financial decision you will make for the rest of your adult life. But this connects to a deeper layer, one that explains why the financial patterns you inherited from your family interact with cost of living pressure to create a ceiling that feels impossible to break through, and why understanding that interaction is the key to dismantling it permanently. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss the content that goes deeper into the psychology of money than anything you will find anywhere else. And share this video with someone whose financial anxiety has become so normalized they have stopped recognizing it as a signal that something needs to change. They need to see this. All content presented in this video is based on scientific studies, peer-reviewed articles and research in behavioral psychology and neuroscience, and the bibliographic references are in the description.